Hello everyone, this is EyesWiseOpen. I'm Ophel. DJ is here.
Hi there.
And our guest is here.
Hello there.
We welcome James Roy. Hi James.
Hello, Afa. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. We are glad that we could get you this time. Maybe we should start by telling everyone what has happened last time, because I just made jokes in all the posts that I did. But on a serious note, you disappeared on us in the last show, so maybe you can tell everyone what happened.
Well, we're in the middle of a good storm, and I imagine there was probably a bit of a flash just before I disappeared. There was a lightning strike about 150 meters off, which took out the communication systems for the valley. Our modem went poof. We didn't get such a good view of it as that YouTube video that you posted of the cloud from the side, but yeah, quite a substantial one.
So I take it all your equipment was fried.
Oh well, no, only the modem.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, the rest all held up all right.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
We were wondering if you were abducted or something untoward had come into your house and had gotten you. We just didn't know what to think because there was zero communications,
Yes.
Just to tell everyone what has actually happened, if people have not been tuning into our website or Google Plus, basically 2 days before the show, there was this really strange cloud above where you are, James. And at the same time, there was also an earthquake going on. And 2 days later, there was this kind of hurricane or big storm going on. And it's interesting because when you came back, James, you wrote to me, we had an EMP. And then when I showed you the cloud, you said, I was not aware of this cloud at all.
Well, we could only see the bottom of it.
Yes. So interestingly, this has happened. And
I'm curious about that because what exactly was that cloud? Why all those multicolors and that mushroom shape? It's actually like above the clouds. Something was going on there.
Well, it's interesting because some people would say this is a cloud that hides a spaceship behind it, so it's like a camouflage. And I would think that there is some kind of weather manipulation going on, and maybe Costa Rica is a very good place to do it because it is prone to earthquakes, and you don't need to do a big thing. You just need to do a small-scale experiments to see if what you are thinking is actually working. So it would be the perfect place. It's also a place where it doesn't really reach the news. The local news never reach global news. So it's a perfect place for whoever wants to experiment with such things, you know, heating up the ionosphere and etc. I'm not going to say exactly which project it is, but we all know what it is. So, yeah, so I assume that this is what's going on. I'm not going to say that it's to do with our show. That would be a bit over the top. But, you know, if we want to be conspiratorial, then maybe.
Well, you know, I wasn't abducted anyway. At least that's what they'll have me remember.
Are you sure about it?
Well, like I say,
any missing time
that's as
going
much
on
as they'll
there?
have me remember.
Yeah.
but quite a spectacular storm, quite a good one.
Yes, yes. Well, we are glad that you are with us this time, and we're hoping that we're going to have a really good discussion about the topic that we were supposed to have last week. So maybe we start by asking you for a bit of a background and maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and the companies you founded, and, you know, just a little bit of background so people are aware, and then we can go delve into it a bit more.
Well, I'm a director of a company called BrainWorks. We're a neurotherapy outfit out of London. We've got clinics in London and Bristol and Harrogate, mainly doing neurofeedback work, neurofeedback and brain training work. We've also founded a company called Transformational Retreats, which is integrating the classic styles of brain training, yoga, body work, meditations, nutrition, these sorts of things, alongside the neurofeedback, in getting people to re-regulate their nervous systems, bring people back down to a neutral point where they're very much themselves.
Okay. So people might be wondering what and how you're doing your work. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that, about the way you're doing the brain mapping and what does it tell you, and what conditions people come with in order to benefit from what you're doing.
Well, we deal with a huge range of conditions, anything from severely autistic children right up to peak performance for big name musical bands, CEOs of corporations. So quite a range. Now, how we do it, we would start out by setting a sensor cap on somebody, and this is an example of a sensor cap here. It's much like a swimming cap with a bunch of sensors embedded into it. And what we would do is we do it. This model has 19, and we use 19 sensors because with a 19 sensor spread, you can actually triangulate and see where signals are coming from in the deep brain, which means we can both spot and train deep brain areas, which are really quite difficult to reach in other methods.
James,
so,
can you hold this close to the camera and don't move so much, so people can actually see what it is? Because when we move, it's kind of get all pixelated.
Okay. So that's what it looks like. It's a black neoprene cap.
And what are the holes? What are the holes for?
The holes are to give your hair a little bit of space to peek out of. Yeah, no, really the holes are just for comfort.
Okay.
Breathing and comfort. Okay. So what we would do is we put one of these caps on and do a couple of recordings to see what people's brains are doing when they're at rest. When there's nothing else going on around them, are they on high alert? Are they in more of a freeze position? Do they have signs of high self-criticism? Is their, say, default mode network, their resting network, is that working properly? Are they off in a dream world somewhere? Are they well concentrated? So it's these sort of things that we're looking for, and then of course we're relating those to their goals. So if somebody is having trouble sleeping, for instance, and perhaps they've got some anger problems, and we take a brain map and we see that their anxiety network is running at, well, say something like 3 times what would be considered comfortable, then that gives us a clear target for training.
Okay, and have you got any of those images that we looked at before, so we can show our viewers what does it mean?
Well, first off, I should probably go over brainwaves a little bit.
Yes, I was going to ask you to start there.
Yes, just so that you know what it is that we're going to be looking at.
Yes.
So the brain's electrical activity runs at different rates. And what we're actually detecting is a mass number of neurons connecting with each other at a certain rate. So now all of the brain waves are going on all of the time. So really what we're looking for is which voice is how loud. And when we're doing the brain map, we're looking at slow brain waves right through to the fast brain waves. Now the slowest brain waves would be called delta. And these run between 1 and 3 cycles per second. Delta is developing between womb and about 3 years old. So really you can think of the function of delta as much like what is developing in a baby. Really, in an adult, it becomes more instinct. It's nonverbal communication, and usually comes from the deep brain. So if you think of it as a musical note, it would be like a drum. So it would be very deeply piercing through the brain, and be able to, it would inform all of the other neurons as to what it's up to. Now, that's most active during dreamless sleep. Or if you have a hangover, you're going to be very, very high in delta, and that's really what delta feels like. It's like perceiving through treacle. The next band up is called theta, and theta is between 4 and 8 cycles a second. And theta is most active during dreaming sleep. So you can think of it as sort of your whole subconscious, whereas delta would be more your unconscious. So your dreams, your fears, your intuition, all of these things would be more a function of theta. Now the division between theta and alpha, which would be the next band up, right in the middle between those, when you're just about to fall asleep, but you're still present as well. So that would be that division between delta and theta. Incidentally, that is also the frequency of the resonance of the planet. It's about 8 hertz, and that's also the frequency of the electromagnetic field of the planet.
Okay.
So alpha, which is the next band up, that is more being present. It's the resting state for the brain. 10.5 hertz, which is sort of midway through that band, would be the resting state. So the power of now would be all about alpha training. The preliminary stages of the Lam Rim, Buddhist meditations would come around that as well, alpha training. Prayer also is around alpha training. So really that's getting the brain, the person, clear and centered and in the moment. Now above alpha, there's the beta brainwaves, and you can think of the beta brainwaves as sort of a slow beta would be more like musing, the brain slowly ticking over. Mid beta would be more along the lines of doing your shopping list for tomorrow, doing mathematics, when you're engaged in a task. That would be a mid beta that the brain would be working at. And high beta, generally that would be curiosity, novelty, anxiety, anything that feels very buzzy and high frequency within your body correlates to high frequency brainwave activity. Anything that feels slow and sluggish and dreamy would correlate to low frequency.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So nervousness
Now,
and anxiety would fall in that high beta range as well, or is there something else going on there?
would generally fall between that high, would generally fall within that high beta range. It depends on how it feels in your body, and really that's going to tell you what brainwave frequency it's functioning at.
Mm-hmm.
If it's more of a general wariness, it might even be an alpha, just a general vigilance. If it's a bit of a ticking over background sort of worry, that's going to be more of a low beta.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a real panic, that's going to be high beta.
Okay.
And I'll pull up a set of brain maps here just so that you can see what it is that I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are looking at a full brain map. The top layer there, we're going from the slow frequencies into the higher frequencies. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the top line. So the 1, 2, and 3 would be most active during dreamless sleep. The 4, 5, 6, 7 would be more active during dreaming sleep, and then coming more into being present, and then more being into anxious. So right off the bat, we can see that this person is going to be extremely fatigued. The activity, the hot colors are going into overactivity. The cool colors, which we actually don't see any of here, are going into lower frequency activity, or going into underactivity. So we can see that relative to everything else, they're going to be really high in delta, really high in fatigue. What would normally be high in dreamless sleep. Also, the dreaming areas are really quite high, so we can see that they're probably really quite exhausted. Coming up more into alpha, we see a little more alpha up front, which is actually a bit of a sign of being a little ungrounded. And also in the higher processing areas, going up into 13, 14, 15, going into the lower lines, we can see that these are working really quite hard. Now, generally, in this case, that's probably the person's compensation. You can see that if somebody is particularly tired and dreamy, they are going to need a little bit of pick-me-up. So again, that's what we'd be seeing in the higher frequencies. Much like if you're very tired, you'd like a cup of coffee. The cup of coffee doesn't reduce your tiredness. What it does is it picks up your higher frequencies. So relative to everything else, you're a little less tired. Relative to dreaminess, you're a bit less tired. And this looks like this particular example looks like it's the brain's compensation for being so incredibly tired.
That's really interesting.
Now I've got some additional ones here as well, which would show sort of the training progression on something like this. Let me get this back up. There we go. So this would have been the first assessment. This one here would have been halfway through their training, and you can see that the anxiety is coming out through the higher frequencies, which in turn is going to help restore sleep. We can see down through the end that there it is, the fatigue and the dreaminess is most of the way out. This is a dozen sessions. This one is based off of, and we can see they're much more grounded and a lot less background anxiety as well.
All right, just let me jump in here to ask a question.
Yes.
Could you just backtrack a little bit and explain the colors? Is it the colors mean something? Yes.
Yes, they do. The warmer colors, so coming into the reds, is showing a high activity. There we go.
High meaning
So
high
so
beta or what?
so no, it is overactivity within the dreaming states
O- Okay.
and within the dreamless sleep state. So essentially, slow brain waves, very fatigue-ish,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
and overactivity as well within the higher brain waves. So that's what we're seeing going from white, which would be what we would consider comfortable. Would be
Okay.
the white areas, and you don't actually see very much of those.
Mm-hmm.
Coming up into the greens, which is just a little more uncomfortable. Coming up into the yellows, which is getting is getting much more uncomfortable, into the yellows and the oranges, up into the red, which is coming into really quite a dominant trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can think of all of these things as little voices, what we're looking for here is which voices are speaking how loudly. So certainly that feeling of intense fatigue is going to be very, very high. That feeling of being in a dream state is also going to be very, very high. It appears they're compensating for that. You can see it on the third line here, 11, 12, 13 hertz, 14,
Mm-hmm.
15, coming into overactivity in in having to think a little faster, having to put a little more anxiety in there because of the intense fatigue.
Mm. That's really interesting. I have a question. Your system, it says it has 19 nodes. So how advanced would you say is your system in mapping and scanning the brain? And does it, does it capture signals from deep inside the brain or just in the cortex? Yeah, tell us about that.
Okay. Well, our system is about as advanced as it gets now.
Mm-hmm.
With the 19 sensor spread, we can see what's going on in all areas all of the time. So we can see how well connected each brain area is. We can see at what speed it's connecting. We can see whether it's overactive or underactive. Now, as far as deep brain, we are looking at much like you can see where a cell phone is by knowing its strength from each tower.
Yeah.
So what we're doing with the 19 sensors is we're getting the surface activity, and we're pinpointing where it is that it comes from. So when it comes to something like network training, that can be very important. Here, let me just show a network. There we go. Okay, so then these would be the functional nodes as one would see on an MRI. We see it in a very similar format. What an MRI tells you is very, very point specifically where something is happening.
Okay.
What an EEG tells you, or a QEEG in this case, electroencephalograph, isn't precisely where things are happening. We get something called voxels. So our resolution is about 7 millimeters cubic. So it doesn't tell us exactly where things are happening, but it tells us exactly what is happening there. So is that activity fast wave activity? Is it stuck in a dreamy state? Is it more along the lines of a damaged area, or is it a stressed out overactive area? And really, for brain training, that's what's important to us. We don't need to know precisely where it's happening. We just need to be able to train it down into a better state of comfort.
Okay. That's pretty cool.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Target networks.
Things have. Yes, we can target entire networks. We can target several networks at once.
Mm-hmm.
Even So typically, when somebody comes in with if it's for solving a problem rather than something like peak performance training, if they're having particular problems, generally that range of problems is going to be linked back to a single network.
Mm.
So, for instance, if somebody, well, like the example I was using earlier, perhaps somebody is getting heart palpitations, they're getting some anger problems, they're having trouble sleeping. Generally, we would take a look and see that perhaps their anxiety network is a bit out of whack. Now,
Okay.
Generally, these things would trace back to older traumas. I mean, there's several ways that these things can set in. Whatever you use over an extended period becomes stronger. So, a problem that might not even surface in your childhood or teen years. So, let's say for instance, there were several years back in mid childhood where you'd get a beating every week or two at school. So you're a little extra wary around school. So the more you're wary, the more easy it is to get wary. The easier it is to look for trouble, because that's what you're using more. And as you age, this wariness can just grow in strength until you get around your 30s and 40s, where it really becomes quite a dominant fixture in your mind.
Wow. So it's like a pattern that starts off as a condition in your early life, and you're saying that this becomes reinforced as you grow older, and by the time you get to your mid-30s or mid-30 to 40, then this becomes like a seriously hardwired setup in your brain.
Yes, and it's something that is quite difficult to pull yourself back out of, because you really don't know any different.
Mm-hmm.
There's a meditation example of, is the fish aware of the water in which it swims? So if you have been wary for the last 30 or 35 years, do you know what not wary feels like? So really what we're trying to do through the neurofeedback is show people what not wary feels like. In this example. What does it feel like to not be on guard? And as soon as somebody glimpses it, they'll say, oh, that feels so much better. I haven't felt like this since I was 12, but I recognize this. Oh, that feels fantastic.
Okay.
So it's rebuilding skills of moving your mind out of positions that you might be stuck in. You know, let's take anxiety as an example. If you are particularly busy at work, almost in a panic at work for 3 days, well, you know, it might just take you an afternoon or an evening perhaps to get off work and drop back down to being neutral, drop back down to where you were before.
Yeah.
If that extends over a couple of weeks, well, it might take you 2-3 days. It might take you a full weekend, maybe a little longer than that. If it goes for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, it starts to build in a habit. And 6-8 weeks down the line, you start to forget where neutral is. You stop realizing that perhaps you are in this stress position all the time, and you have a very difficult time dropping back out of it. 10-15 years down the line, it gets much more difficult still. So really, it's bringing somebody back to themselves.
This 6 to 8 weeks number, I've read about it in quite a number of disciplines that look at habits. Can you explain what's going on there from a neuronal perspective?
From a neurological point of view, again, it's very much like a muscle. So if you're constantly using it, particularly if it has anything to do around threat to life, things around it is your brain's job to keep you alive.
Yeah.
And the certainly the fight, flight, and the freeze mechanisms. This is where it really sets in hard. So let's go to looking out for roadside bombs. If these things are a threat to life, your brain is going to go on high alert. And it is very much like a muscle. If your brain is on high alert for an extended period of time, that position becomes stronger and stronger and stronger and harder to break out of. Particularly when it gets down into those animal survival areas, vagus nerve type stuff. They're very difficult areas of your brain to reason with, and really they're about the farthest away from the conscious that you can get.
Okay.
Now when these things start taking over, it draws energy from other areas. So there are only so many electrics to go around. The brain takes up 40 to 60% of our calorie intake just to keep it running. It's a very expensive piece of machinery, calorie-wise. So when it comes to higher thinking, these really, on a biological basis, are luxuries. They're not something that keep you alive when a bear is attacking you. When a bear is attacking you, the frontal lobes go completely, the animal instincts take over, and the person will probably be in movement even before their frontal lobes, where their decisions are made, really even registers that anything is happening. So it's these base instincts really where neurofeedback very much comes into its own. Now there's a number of other things that we work on as well. For instance, in the States now, this is a medical technique for attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's also a diagnosis in the States for this. Okay. And that would be something like, we saw the dreamy states being very prevalent up front in that map that we saw. So rather than being sharp and attentive, what's happening there is that the frontal lobes that regulate your attention are in a dream state, and so your attention naturally wanders all over. You go to read a book, and it's, oh, I need a cup of tea, and oh, what about this, and very quickly you realize that you haven't retained anything that you've read, because your frontal lobes have been off dreaming somewhere.
I do a lot of programming, and sometimes I'm sitting for, I don't know, 10 to 15 hours, and I might move only 2 or 3 times in that time. Yeah, and I become very aware sometimes that I am not really thinking or not really processing the information very clearly. It's as if I'm on automatic, but after a while I'm doing very, very slowly what I would normally do very quickly. And so would this be a case where the frontal lobes also shut down, and
are likely starting to tire? So yes, once they begin to tire, then they start to slip into the lower frequency activity, and things start heading a little more towards dreamy state rather than proper focused concentration. You can only keep these things up for so long. Now, I probably should mention a little bit about how it is that we actually correct these problems.
Yeah.
So when we get the brain map, we know what the person's goals are. We know what the person's brain is presenting, which gives us our targets for training. So what we would do is we'd put on the same cap that we used before and monitor those brain areas and just see what they're doing. So if we were working on something like the concentration example, the frontal lobes, if they start to slip more into a dreamy state, then we would have a signal to give them. Usually we would use something like a cartoon or a video or perhaps a video game. So in the video game example, when the child is concentrating well, or adult is concentrating well, then their spaceship will fly in front of the other spaceships.
Mm.
When their concentration starts to slip, or they start to get a little dreamy or distracted, their spaceship falls back of the other ones. So in learning how to get your spaceship in front of the other spaceships, really what you're learning to do is how to regulate your concentration. The same would work with anxiety states, self-criticism, decision-making, how different brain areas are linking to each other, which would be important in learning disabilities and autism. So by learning how to do a task, you are learning how to shift your brain into positions that it's not used to, new and unusual positions. And this is also why meditators love it.
Mm-hmm.
Because certainly when you're trying to reach a certain state, having a gauge as to when you're heading in that direction, when you're not heading in that direction, is very, very important.
All right.
I wanted to touch a little bit about the subject of trauma, because I think that a lot of the viewers that would be tuning into this would be people who have been in active service, people who have been in war, and obviously there is quite a lot of experiences that they go through which are hard to reconciliate with normal life.
Yes.
And so there is obviously an effect which happens in their brain when they go through their traumatic experiences. And if I would like it if you could talk a little bit about that and how something like what you do might be helpful, how long it might take. Is there other things that you would suggest to somebody like that, or would it be just your system of brain mapping and then the treatment that you do?
Well, a combined approach, now it depends very much on the case, and really we have a much better idea once we get forms and a brain map and be able to properly review the case. For post-traumatic stress, this is now something that the U.S. military has introduced into VA hospitals in the States. A couple of years back, the U.S. military had a review. They'd pumped tens of millions into the psychiatric industry, looking for something to help post-traumatic stress, being such an expensive problem. And they came back with nothing but improved medications, which still weren't doing the job. So the U.S. military, to a large degree, fired medicine and started looking at other therapies. Neurofeedback is really the most promising of the therapies that they reviewed, and they've started to introduce it into the military. They were already using it for Navy SEAL peak performance training. They were using it at West Point, so it's nothing that was completely foreign to them. And the results they're getting with the neurofeedback are absolutely fantastic. What we're seeing in those cases are the areas involved in hypervigilance. It's actually right over this area, the right temporal region, and really it's right amygdala, which is responsible for the fight-flight responses, looking for danger. And when these are on high alert, they're always on high alert. So if a car backfires, the person can quite often find themselves on the floor before they even realize what has happened.
Yes.
So it's these areas that we're looking for. Now it does vary a bit case to case. No two post-traumatic stresses are exactly alike. Everybody is a little different, but it will be very similar areas that are on high alert. So it's getting these things back down to a calm position, getting them out of that stuck position.
Yes, it is interesting topic because obviously um, people are resilient or not resilient to traumatic experiences from a very early age. And there is a lot of research that suggests that even starts before we are born. It starts in utero.
Well,
And
yes.
sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, and again, this is something where they're starting to look at EEG mapping before taking somebody on in the military. You can actually, through the lower brain waves, you can actually start to see where the developmental stages have happened and perhaps any interruptions there. So, if somebody has a tendency towards a high tendency towards a fight-flight response. Traumatic childhood, they are going to be much more prone to post-traumatic stress than somebody who has not. On the other end of that, if somebody has had no exposure to traumatic events and they're suddenly loaded with a bunch of them, again, that's gonna result in a similar position. There seems to be a happy medium. There's an excellent book that's actually just come out by Bessel van der Kolk. And he's an ex-soldier, and he presents sort of the newer methods of dealing with post-traumatic stress. The book just came out earlier this year. It's a New York Times bestseller, actually, and actually it is it is incredibly similar to our retreats program. It's combining neurofeedback with yoga, meditation. Also, with a brain map, you can customize meditations because you can see what mental skills people will be weak at and which ones they'll be better at. So you can really target in. And
yes, it is an interesting topic also from another perspective, and that is that again, some viewers of this show will be people who have gone through quite a lot of programs, the super soldier programs, the various military, but also intergenerational programming, grooming for positions. This would involve quite a lot of trauma. And in fact, people who have been in, say, the CIA or those kind of alphabetic agencies would have those experiences. They would have an intergenerational experience of abuse from a very early age in order to create a certain personality, or we can say personality disorder, to facilitate the role that they're going to play when they are older. And a lot of those people reach a certain age, and then suddenly it starts to all break down. The programming that they've gone through starts to break down. So my question to you is, would you be able to help people like that?
well, yes, the medical industry would say personality disorder, because the medical industry is geared around drugs, and there's antipsychotics for that, and various drugs for that. From our point of view, we would call that a stuck brain position, where they're jammed into a certain spot and they don't know how to get themselves out. Whether that's because it's been too long since they've broken out of it, or just completely lost sight of where their core is, where they themselves are, what life is like without these background thoughts. we would work to identify which areas of the brain it is that are running overactive or underactive, and again, just training those areas back into a state of balance so that the person can start to see their way out of these difficulties. And really, once you start feeling like the world is a safer place, for instance, once you start feeling that it's a safer place, it's actually a happier place to be. And we always draw towards happiness. That's why we call it happiness. We call it, it takes a lot of reinforcement of discomfort to get someone to actually stay there. It takes a lot of drilling in to get them back out of it. You just have to show them where comfortable is a couple of times, and they'll be very pleased to stay there.
This is what I wonder about, how permanent such a treatment would be. Like, if you are somebody who have been traumatized as a young person, and then this trauma was reinforced in older age, and say there's somebody who is 40 years old or 50 years old, and they've had all those experiences. And by the way, when I talk about trauma, I don't just mean, the extreme side of it. It could be trauma that happened as a result of, say, a car accident, or, witnessing something, or any kind of trauma. And it has been reinforced. And then they approach somebody like yourself and they have treatment. So let's say, how many sessions would somebody might have to see an improvement, and then how long it lasts? Do they go back to the old pattern after a while? Do they need to come back for reinforcement? How would you relate to that?
Well, it varies a lot from individual to individual. So, in general, and this isn't always the case, the older the person is, the slower they learn. So if somebody is in their 70s, they're not going to have nearly the response. It's going to take a lot longer to get a response than it is for somebody who's in their mid-40s. Whereas somebody who's 8 years old is really going to need very few sessions. And it depends very much on how long the trauma's been there. So if you're dealing with an 8-year-old, that trauma is not going to have been there more than 8 years and 9 months. If you're dealing with a 50-year-old, that trauma could have been there for 50 years and 8 months. So the longer the habit has been there, the harder it is to shift. Now, in general, this is using more advanced equipment where you can train multiple areas at once. So more like the equipment that we're using. You'd be looking at sort of a dozen sessions to get some relief. 20 sessions is usually a good degree of symptom resolution. So if it is a recent car accident, a dozen, and there's no other complications other than that, then a dozen sessions is probably going to do it. If it is somebody who has come back from war, and they've been over there 3 years, then we're only setting to a position that was there 3 years prior. 20 sessions would do that quite nicely. If it is a 45-year-old person with a history of childhood traumatic abuse, and then we've got a bunch of things piled on to their life ahead of that, and they're presenting a multitude of problems over different brain areas, then 20 sessions will get a good bite out of it, but it's likely going to require more than that. Again, the more willing the person is to actually see their way out of these problems, the better.
Yes.
How much time between sessions when you say 20 sessions, how much time do you allow the person to rest, or the brain rests before they come back for the next session?
Well, it varies quite a bit, again. So if somebody is generally, the more serious the condition, the slower we take it. It allows more time for integration, and it makes a nice, steady, slow shift back into balance. So, for serious diagnosed medical conditions, we would do a session or two a week. That'll be the slowest that we work, because it does take some amount of reinforcement as well. If you think of it as French lessons, and you only take a French lesson once every 3 weeks, you'll have completely forgotten what you learned the first time around by the time you come for your second lesson. So that's not really productive either. 1 a week would be the minimum that we would do. On the other hand, 2 a day would be the most that we do. So if somebody is quite robust, not unstable, they're looking for something more along the peak performance lines, or simple problem resolution, then 2 sessions a day is just fine. In general, the more intensively we work, the better the results that we get, and certainly the quicker the results are. Yeah, just that.
I just wondered about the other aspects that goes on to something like that. For example, when somebody goes through an experience, okay, we can give them sessions and change the way their brain is responding to certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but
actually, technically, they are responding how they are changing how their own brain responds to certain situations.
Okay. What I'm trying to get at is basically there is a lot to be said about awareness to what you are going through, and the wisdom of learning from that awareness of why you are responding to situation in a certain way, in order for a change to really settle in. And I just wondered if there is any kind of part in your treatment that addresses this.
Well, actually,
yeah, go on.
The person will actually regulate themselves. So the brain locks memories and experiences into the background if you're not able to process and handle them. Mm-hmm. As the brain starts coming into a better state of balance, these things. Now we're talking about trauma. We're not talking about we're not talking in all cases here. Those old feelings and old memories can start to come forward and be processed. And really, it's just part of the natural process. When your brain is when you are in the position where you can start to handle these things, they just start to come forward and manifest themselves naturally. Usually, that comes through in sleep disturbances. So usually it's overnight where these things happen. People can start to get an increase in nightmares. They'll have memories of things that they'd completely forgotten. But again, it's just their mind being in a better position to handle it.
Okay. So
yes,
I guess.
Sorry, go on.
I was just thinking that following up on your question and trying to see if I understand what you're saying, James. I guess you are saying, Ofer, that when you're doing the brain work, that some form of support or counseling would be might be necessary, but then
beneficial,
I think what you're saying, yeah, but I think what James is saying, if I'm trying to understand it for myself, so I'm repeating it, that as the brain begins to find its balance, a lot of the memories that hold these disturbing trauma begin to work themselves out as well. Is that what you're saying? So that
Correct.
counseling, we might not need so much counseling after all.
Correct. And there's different schools of thought on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly those from a psychology background will approach it more as a supporting therapy to psychology. Now, in my experience, really what we are trying to do is get people out of habitual situations. So we don't want to go poking and prodding and asking a pile of questions to get people back into that spot. So through the psychological approach, really you're going in, you are going into the trauma, hopefully resolving it, and then finishing without it. What we're trying to do is really much the opposite of that. We just want to get people to see their way out of that trouble. So what does life look like without that trouble? Getting some mental flexibility back within the system. And when that mental flexibility starts to come back in and they start to see their way out of the traumatic experiences, then those memories can come up and just sort themselves naturally as we do as an animal.
So would you say the neurofeedback approach tends to be faster, brings resolution faster than the psychological approach?
Well, again, I think that depends on who you ask, but certainly 20 sessions for some reasonably to resolve some reasonably serious conditions. That's a very quick response time, very, very fast response time.
Okay.
Compared to other methods.
You talk about the flexibility of our I can't remember now how you termed it, but the ability of us being flexible and changing and shifting in relation to the way our brains work. You want to touch a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, now mental flexibility is really a hallmark of most any peak performer. So whether if somebody's on stage playing music, if somebody is in a board meeting, if somebody is playing football, really it's that mental flexibility that you want. You don't want to be worrying about whether you're going to win or lose. You don't want to be worrying about what the crowd's thinking. You don't want to be worrying about who your wife's having an affair with during these moments. You need to be absolutely clear and centered. And it's the mental flexibility to drop yourself out of those worries and drop yourself out of those states and drop yourself out of those concerns. Spinning your wheels somewhere where you don't need to be, really. It's the mental flexibility to get into that state of pure, clear presence. Certainly through the spiritual realms as well. And in looking at Buddhist monks, now I should go back into the sports thing a little bit. You know, Chelsea uses this, AC Milan uses this, Real Madrid uses this, because it is so powerful in getting people into a present state. And some years ago, the Dalai Lama became really quite interested in the brain sciences. Now he's a pretty clever fellow. So he ran into a fellow named Richard Davidson, and back in I think it was '88, they had their first meeting between neuroscientists and the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama had met Daniel and said, "Well, you know, I'm really interested in the brain. Would you be able to teach me something?" So he said, well, yes. He says, well, who would you be able to get together? Maybe we can discuss. And he got a group of neuroscientists together. They all went to Dharamsala up in India, and they had a two-week meeting. And so the first meeting, the Dalai Lama asked a lot of questions and was learning about neuroscience. And they all had a good time. So they figured they'd do it every couple of years. So they did it again a couple of years later, and a couple of years after that. And by the time the late 90s hit, the Dalai Lama was teaching the neuroscientists a lot more about what the brain was capable of than the neuroscientists were teaching him.
Okay.
I imagine he probably knew that was going to be the situation before he even entered into it. I mean, the Tibetans had a third of their population researching the mind as monks for 1,000 years. So if you can consider what kind of technology level you can get into through inner searching, with a third of your population doing it for 1,000 years, that's really it's quite powerful. Now, when they started measuring the Dalai Lama's monks, they were seeing things that were considered not possible at all. One fellow in particular, they put him in an MRI, and they unexpectedly, to the fellow in the MRI, put off a noise the equivalent of a gunshot volume next to him while they were scanning his brain. There was not a glimmer anywhere in his brain of threat detection. He was in such a state that he could override any of those areas, any of those deep brain areas, if he so wanted. He could put himself into a dream state whenever he wanted to do that. So whenever he wanted to access intuition, his brain would slip into an intuitive state. He would do the task, come back to neutral. He'd go into busier meditations. Then it would slide up the brainwave scale. As soon as that was done, his brain would slide back into neutral state. Actually, that's a good introduction to gamma as well. I described all of the brainwave states except for one.
Before you jump there, I wanted to touch on some more. Wanted you to get a little bit more into peak performance. I have a lot of questions about the spiritual, by the way, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about peak performance and how you approach getting, say, a sports person to their peak. What do you look for in the brain, and how does that work for you?
Well, first of all, what we're looking for is making sure that everything's running smoothly. So, is there activity that's being sucked up in areas that where it's being wasted? Are they stuck in any positions that aren't going to benefit them in any way? So is there mental energy being used efficiently? And really, that's the first port of call. Once any problem solving has been done, then we get rid of our medical databases and we go old school.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we would, so for instance, perhaps teach them how to train their frontal lobes into an abnormal state of concentration. We can help improve their mind-body connection. We can particularly in race car driving, it's very important to be able to switch your brain into neutral, particularly your frontal lobes I'm talking about. If you wait, if you're going around a track and you have to make a decision, it's going to be too late. You need to be able to shift your brain into neutral and let your body be at one with the vehicle, and you need to react faster than your frontal lobes can do it.
Okay, so that's instinctive
and this
training,
is the profile.
then.
Yes, exactly. How to switch your mind into neutral. Video gamers are also the same way. The frontal lobes are pretty slow in comparison to body reflex. So really, you need the skills and you need your reflexes to take care of it. If you're if your brain starts to get into it, if your higher level thinking starts to come into the picture, you've lost.
Mm.
And I'm sure any peak performer will know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, it's that feeling of being in the zone where you're
Yeah.
almost watching yourself in action. You're not so much engaged with it. You're watching your body do what it needs to do.
I think it's the same with musicians, because I'm a musician and I know what it is to be
Yes.
trying to, especially when you're a learner, you're an amateur musician, you do a lot of thinking that I think the professionals just stay away from because they enter a flow and they play
Yes.
there. So they are not really thinking, they're
Yes.
feeling.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So then they are working to put themselves into a given state, that state of flow. Now, if they are worried about the heckler in the third row of the auditorium, that is going to very much bring them out of it.
Yeah.
So it's having that flexibility to not get stuck into those states, into worrying what's happening with the guy in the third row. You need to be centered in exactly on your task in order to do it perfectly. Now this is of course after you've learned it.
What you're
Sorry?
saying, what you are saying is that the training is to get them to be very centered and not be attending to anything that goes on around. So,
nothing that they don't need to be at that particular time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And from the perspective of brainwaves, what does this look like to that state of neutral? You mentioned, is it that you bring your beta brainwaves down or into a state of synchrony, or what? What does it mean?
Well, actually, what is interesting is that they all look the same. So whether
Yeah.
you are looking at a monk doing presence meditations, power of now type stuff, so setting their brain present, or whether you're looking at a race car driver, or whether you're looking at a musician, or whether you're looking at a sports person, it's all actually the same. Almost all of the energy is going into mid-alpha stillness. Really, that's where it is. It's that witness state. So there isn't a lot of computing going on. There isn't a lot of thinking going on. There's not a lot of remembering going on. There's just not a lot going on. It is slipped right into neutral.
Okay. So to do more, you have to do less.
To do more, you have to do less. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, let's
now
go back.
that's when you reach the professional level, not when you're learning. First you have to get the skills down, and then you can let your body do it.
Yeah, man, that's really interesting. Go ahead, Opa.
Shall we go back to the discussion about gamma and the flexibility of the mental flexibility that we discussed before? And also, before we go into it, I just want to say something about it. It's as if what we're looking at is a synchronization between the two sides of the brain. Would you say this is an accurate statement?
It's a component. It's a component to it. So it is. So it's not the end-all be-all, but yes, hemispheres that are properly connecting. I'll tell you what. I've got to let me go a little forward in my pictures here.
Okay.
Okay. So we're back to our old brain map pictures again, and this one is a full report summary of this person. Now we're looking at more things than just the power. If you look at the lower two lines there, it's called coherence and phase lag.
Yes.
We can see here in the coherence. So red is overactive, blue is underactive. And what we're seeing here in the coherence is that all areas of the brain are speaking all at once. Typically when this happens, nothing is being heard. So again, these are two hemispheres that are not speaking to each other efficiently, and actually within the same hemisphere, even they're not speaking to each other efficiently. And the lower one tells us that those areas are also connecting very, very slowly. And the left and right brain are connecting very slowly with each other. And again, this is something that we do work with. We can see this is halfway through training, and then this is around the end of training.
So this would be a more positive outcome or situation, what you are showing us last.
That's yes. It's a much more efficient way of working, and certainly getting the areas, the various brain areas, to communicate with each other well. Now, interhemispheric stuff, that could be a whole show in itself, really. The interactions between the left and right brains. It's a massive topic, but really, what it boils down to is that you can think of it as two separate selves. And they are very much like two separate selves. In fact, you could chop the corpus callosum, the connector between the two hemispheres, and sometimes what comes out with that is that while the right hand, your left brain, is reaching for your white shirt in the morning to go to work, puts it on and starts buttoning it up, the left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, will be trying to unbutton your shirt and grabbing that colorful shirt over there on the chair and trying to put it on. Now, the person's
some people do have the experiences, by the way, after surgery. There's some people who have had those experiences.
Yes. Oh, yes, very much. It's very much like two different selves.
Yeah.
Now the left brain has the consciousness trump. So it will filter out and get rid of what the right brain has to say. Again, this is a massive topic, and we could go on this for ages. And certainly why the left hemisphere is a little bigger. Certainly with speech, being speaking animals, which is a left hemisphere trump. Being trained in the sciences, which is again much more left hemisphere. Really, our whole society is very much a left hemisphere built construct. We love our rules and our regulations and reducing things. Some of us. Okay, some of us.
Yeah, but you're saying that the size of the left hemisphere is a result of our socialization, our culture, our lifestyles?
Well, I'd say our conditioning, more like it.
Well, there is a lot of debate over it. Certainly our left hemisphere is actually beginning to overgrow our right hemisphere. Mm-hmm. Physically, it is actually physically larger and actually overgrows at the front. From every biological standpoint, really it's a bit insane.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So is it nature? Is it nurture?
When I think about yoga and the basic principles of yoga, at least yoga exercise, it encourages balance all the while. And once you feel balanced, you feel good. So that hints to me or indicates to me that to have one part of the body, of the brain, much larger than the other side is really not the ideal state.
It is really not the ideal state. No, no. From any other biological measure, and it is interesting that you bring that up. I'm just gonna pull up an image here. There we go. So I think that this is what you were talking about,
Yeah.
that state of balance. This is the Indian symbol for balance, and of course, what you're trying to achieve through yoga and meditation is first balancing the Ida and Pingala, which in the Western would be the sympathetic and parasympathetic, or the vagal nerve function. Yeah. So getting your traumas worked out, getting these things back into balance, and then what you're working on is the Sushumna, the center channel. Now, I'm just going to bring up this image. This is the Western symbol for medicine.
That's funny.
Which came from the Greeks, following on from the Indian. Of course, this symbol is a couple thousand years older than this symbol, but it seems that at somewhere in our history, we seem to have forgotten a little bit about that balance.
Yeah, yeah.
But certainly at the core of medicine, at the core of the symbol for medicine, is that internal balance, is that balance between the fight, flight, and the freeze mechanisms. It's getting your nervous system balanced and tuned to be able to move forward into states that are perhaps a little more unusual.
Yes. So going back to gamma.
Yeah.
I read on your website that people who are under anesthetics don't display any gamma.
Correct. Now the rest of the brain waves keep going.
Yes, that is a very interesting point, isn't it? Because why would that happen? What's your interpretation of that?
Well, rather than interpreting, I'll just kind of give you the rundown of it. It's
go for it.
When gamma's not there, you're not there. Now, gamma is very interesting because, as I went through the brain waves, what we're really looking at there are neuronal firing rates. So when this neuron fires with this neuron, you get a little electric spark, and it's mass firings of those sparks at a certain rate, which give us the brain waves. Gamma is interesting because it fires between 38 and 42 hertz, and whereas the neurons will only fire up to 38 hertz. So gamma was thought to be spare brain noise. It was thought to be really nothing at all. It was just a strange resonance. Couldn't possibly be responsible for anything since the brain doesn't fire since neurons don't fire at that rate.
Junk DNA.
Sorry?
A bit like junk DNA.
And a bit like junk DNA. A bit like junk anything. I think most of us can probably agree that if something isn't useful in the body, in nature, it gets rid of it. Yes. Everything's there for something.
No, absolutely. I was saying it half jokingly,
So gamma was considered to be spare brain noise until they started looking at the Dalai Lama's monks. And when they were doing compassion meditations, they saw gamma jump to 30 times what was ever recorded before.
30 times so in terms of the volume, in terms of
the volume. Sorry, okay. in terms of the amount of gamma. So clearly they were gamma engaged. The task that they were in was functioning under gamma. So it was a non-physical. Interesting as well. There, back in the late '80s, there was something called the God helmet, and what that was is it ran what would almost be considered an interference pattern at 40 hertz. Okay. So right in the middle of gamma. And when that interference pattern was created, some people, and certainly not all, would start getting out-of-body experiences, start hearing voices around them, get a sensed presence of someone around. And what that was effectively doing was separating the body and thinking processes from whatever is above that.
Hmm.
Now, I'm just going to go into the lower brain waves a little more in relation to gamma for things like compassion. So while a monk is engaged in compassion, they see their gamma jump hugely. Now, gamma, being a very fast brainwave, takes a lot of energy to generate, and because it takes so much energy to generate, it is very, very quiet. So, if somebody is stuck in fear states, fear, jealousy. Actually, you can kind of bring it down to what the Indians would call samskaras, or what in the Christian traditions would be sort of the classic sins. You know, the things to avoid.
Right.
These things tend to be very loud, low-frequency activity. If you have these things going on, you will never hear something as subtle as gamma, because it's simply too quiet. When the brain is still, when the brain is in the moment, that's when these states come more to the fore, and that's why the preparatory work is so important.
Oh, okay.
You know, back in the day, all of the higher practices, so things that would cultivate gamma, were kept secret until the person was ready to take them on, because of course you don't want a flood of old material coming forward by cultivating something like gamma. So that's not the first stage. That's that's along the later stages. If you start to cultivate gamma before it's too early, or in the Eastern traditions, taking on higher practices before the proper preparatory work has been done, you get things like Kundalini madness is what it's called in the Eastern tradition, or Dark Night of the Soul in the Christian tradition, or trial. It's a bit of a trial by fire.
Right. Hence, wax on, wax off. You know this?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Right. A long period of hard training before you get introduced to the higher
long period of hard training.
Right.
And if we go back to let's get this one back up. Again, you know, what we're looking at in balancing the Ida and Pingala, or the sympathetic and parasympathetic, as we call it in the West, the functions and the wiring are the same. Is again getting rid of those extraneous thoughts, getting rid of all that background chatter, the fears, the old material, cleaning all of that out before you go for the Sushumna, which is more in the gamma training.
Okay.
So I reckon that medicine could do pretty well by studying their symbol for medicine.
Yeah. I find that really funny. That's so funny because, you know, they have turned their back almost exclusively on anything that refers to spirituality, consciousness, and so on. And yet, at the heart of medicine, there is the symbol for the whole thing. You know.
Yes.
That's really fascinating.
So going back to the gamma range of brain waves, is that something that you measure in your brain mapping?
It's something that we measure, and it is something that we work with as well. However, that groundwork has to be done first. Yes, jumping straight into gamma training is very much like jumping straight into the higher methods that again used to be kept, the higher Eastern methods, which used to be kept secret until the person was ready, and then they'd be released.
I didn't mean the training. I just meant whether you at all tune into that, whether you're measuring for it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to say something about that here. You know, because ever since I heard about the gamma, you know, I first read about it in, I think Michael Hutchison's. You know Michael Hutchison, right? I think he died
Yep.
some years ago. He wrote a book called Mega Brain. Um, a lot of people who were using the audio method found that they did not have much success using binaural beats to trigger it. Simply because I think that maybe the frequencies are too fast for the brain to discern or to use sound resonance to react to the incoming gamma frequencies. So, but they then found that another method that uses pulsing sound, isochronic beats they call it, was much more effective in helping to trigger the native brainwave or the native gamma frequencies. And I've had for the past, well, 2 3 years, maybe a little bit more than that, a special private meditation track that goes on for 2 hours that uses gamma. You know, I've never released it actually. I just use it for my own personal practice, primarily for the reason you have said, because I think it might be a little bit too heavy for the average person who, you know, just to plop it on and begin to do gamma training. So what would you suggest that persons do before to prepare themselves to access or to be ready to, you know, use any kind of gamma stimulation or activation method?
Well, certainly, you know, read the old instructions. We all tend to be in a bit of a rush these days, and you know, really,
Yeah.
that bodes very well for neurofeedback because of course we can get people into a good position much quicker. However, you know, these things are typically a lifetime worth of work.
Okay.
Now, gamma binaurals, if you're not actually generating them yourself, it makes it very difficult to reach on your own. So, for instance, you can take a drug for concentration, you know, something like Ritalin or a methamphetamine, other based like that, which is going to upregulate your frontal lobes, but you're not actually learning how to do it yourself. You're not skills building. So
Right.
so when you stop the drug, that's it. It goes back to where it was. Binaural beats. Just a bit about binaurals. Rather than going in for a specific brain position, what they will do is they entrain the entire brain to a single frequency.
Yeah.
And for some people that's fine. For others, it can be quite uncomfortable. So, for instance, if somebody is taking a focus and concentration CD, there can be several reasons for why they can't concentrate. If generally these are like a beta 1 entrainment, so they're pushing the whole brain into a beta 1 position. If they can't concentrate because their mind is always too busy, it's actually going to make it worse.
Yeah, right.
Because they're already excessive in that brainwave frequency. So certainly gamma entrainment, some people can find it extremely wiring.
Yeah.
Very within the body, and then that is a sign that you're not quite ready for the gamma.
Not ready for the gamma. I like how you say that.
Not ready for the gamma.
Yeah. But and it's good you mentioned that, because there's another method. It's primarily because you know, the brainwave entrainment methods do not use feedback in the way that neurofeedback does. So I think what many people have tried to do is to create a mix of brain waves that target not just one frequency, but a range of frequencies or layers that are supposed to be more helpful in balancing various areas of. So you may take say alpha or theta and mix it with a certain frequency of alpha and maybe beta as well, and there are different types of thinking processes going into that. Some people actually base their work on some amount of neurofeedback that they had done to come up with these, let's call it patterns of various synchronizations that are mixed together. So what do you think about that approach?
Well, again, you're not really reaching those states yourself.
Yeah.
So they're much more drug-like in the way that they will push the brain into a certain position.
Mm-hmm.
And entrainment is great to, particularly sound enlightened entrainment, to get an idea as to what the different brainwave states feel like, because they'll very much push your whole brain into that position. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know what your starting point is, it can be quite difficult to get it right.
Yeah.
And really quite easy to get it wrong. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is using a creativity and intuition CD, for instance, mm-hmm. and they've got a lot of subconscious material going on, maybe a lot of fears going on.
Yeah.
They're going to be upping the fears
mm-hmm.
by using that entrainment. Generally, brains are a little patchier, so seldom is there one frequency where you can say, okay, this is the one to work on. We do actually have binaurals when somebody is globally deficient within a certain frequency, and we just give it to them as a bit of a at home thing mm-hmm. to work on. It can help flexibility a little bit, but again, mm-hmm. they're not learning how to shift their brain into that state at will, which is really what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to move a little bit to another area. We know that you are doing work with autistic kids that have attention deficit disorder. You mentioned Ritalin. That would be a good time to look a little bit under the hood on that perspective. And I'd like to start by, if you can give us a little bit of a description of what a brain of an autistic person and what a brain of a attention deficit disorder person would present, and what can you and the techniques that you are using can do for something like that.
Okay. Well, let's do the attention deficit one first, because it's actually quite a bit easier. Now, attention deficit and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are descriptions of the symptoms. Really, I mean, it's a diagnosis, so it's a description of the symptom. Either the child can't concentrate, or has trouble regulating their concentration, or they have trouble regulating their concentration and are hyperactive. So it doesn't actually tell you anything about the nature of the problem. By brain mapping, you can actually see what's going on. There are, to date, 12 different signatures for attention deficit disorder with various problems. The most common one is that the frontal lobes, where attention is regulated, is in a dreamy state, is stuck in a dreamy state, and so we're doing skills building exercises as to how to get that lobe to start regulating itself properly and start being able to stay in on task. Now, if the frontal lobes are dreamy, it's very difficult to be in. It's very difficult to function when you're off in a dreamy state somewhere. So typically, you need a little hyperactivity to perk that up, much like a cup of coffee would do. So you can counteract that dreaminess by ramping up the adrenals and getting really going, which again I think is likely why you get the attention deficit in combination with the hyperactivity. It's not always.
Yes.
So what we're looking for in the brain map is really, okay, why can't that person concentrate? Is the energy all being used up somewhere else? Are they in a traumatized state? Are they in a dissociative state? Is it that their frontal lobes are not regulating themselves properly? Is there any brain damage? What's going on? And that gives us our trainings for our targets for training. So it's not a matter of a person comes in with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and this is the protocol that we run. We want to see what's going on, what's the situation, why can't this child concentrate, what's their particular, how do they feel, right? How's their way of seeing the world?
So normally somebody would come to you, they already have a diagnosis of that condition, and they would look to remedy the situation, or can they come to you to diagnose that kind of condition?
In the States, you can get a diagnosis for attention deficit through a QEEG, the same equipment and the same software that we use. That's not the case in Europe at the moment. So what
would be the diagnostic method in Europe for such a condition?
It's a checklist.
Okay.
Yeah. So really, it's a description of symptoms.
Right.
And most anything is. Parkinson's is a description of symptoms.
Yes. Do you find that sometimes
post-traumatic stress is a description of symptoms.
Do you find that sometimes people come to you with a child that has been diagnosed through this kind of checklist, and that actually when you start looking into their brain activity, you discover there's something entirely different going on?
Oh yes, commonly, commonly, and then usually these are the people that are coming to see us because they're not responsive to medications, and the reason they're not responsive to the medications is that their profile isn't the typical profile. So let's say the child is having difficulty concentrating because of shutdown and freeze responses, a highly overactive parasympathetic system. If that's the case, they're not going to react the same way to the amphetamines, to Ritalin, and so on, that the classic case would. So yes, actually, we see a lot of atypical cases, which brings me to autism.
Yes.
Because autism, Asperger's, all of these things are incredibly wide diagnoses, very, very wide diagnoses, and
what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, when somebody comes to us saying that their email saying that the child has autism and what could we do, that's not telling us much of anything. What types of dysregulation have they got? Are they having sensory integration troubles? Are they having troubles? Are they having interhemispheric troubles? Can't tell their right from their left. No dominant hand. Clumsy. How well is their speech regulated? Can they put together what someone is saying, the words that they're saying, along with the inflection that comes with them, which is 95% of the meaning? If you can't put those two together, speech gets very, very difficult. How is their auditory processing? How is their visual processing? I mean, quite often, for our visual field, for you and I, we'd see quite a narrow band right in front of us, and everything else sort of fades out to the periphery. Well, it's quite often in autistic children that they would see with the clarity and resolution that we see straight in front all the way out to the periphery. Wow. So when there's a lot of visual stimulus going on, it's very, very difficult. And audio the same way. if we are in a crowded room, you can concentrate in on what I'm saying, and to the exclusion of everything else. They've got difficulty with that kind of filtering. So again, it's a very different kind of work, because what we're trying to do is get their senses to filter properly. Gut dysbiosis as well can be a huge part of it. Things like wheat and casein can be converted into something akin to an opiate if the gut is not digesting properly. So again, that throws off the neurotransmitters. The child is going to be crazy for wheat, because that's his opium.
Right.
And it is very difficult to learn and make new connections when there are these chemicals within the system. Detoxification is really important. So for us, we do a combination approach, depending on the case, because again, two children can have the same autism diagnosis. In one case, it's connectivity trouble. In another case, it can be sensory integration trouble, which is completely different. Really, what the autism is telling us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. You just finish the point, and then I'll just jump in with a question here.
Well, what the autism diagnosis is telling us is that a professional has said that something is very wrong.
Okay.
But there's not much else we can tell beyond that. Beyond that, we've got to start narrowing it down and say, okay, where's the dysfunction, and what's the best therapy to fix that? So we would usually use something along the lines of, in a typical case, we'd use something along the lines of dietary interventions, gut rebuilding, food exclusions, sensory integration exercises, sensory filtering tools, and neurofeedback. So it's quite a combined approach, and the results can be what is not considered possible.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I have two questions. Yeah. But the first one I wanted to ask you, what would you say was one of your most astounding cases in dealing with autism?
Well, in autism, you can get some really astounding cases, because, of course, when things are let's say 400% out of balance, things are way out of balance, and you can get a 50% correction on that over a course of sessions, and things go from 200% out of balance to, or 400% out of balance to 200% out of balance, which is massive. So on the most extreme case, we had a child, 13 years old, was not able to leave the house, would melt down as soon as he'd go outdoors. Meltdown being a bit of a crying and hitting and lashing out fit. Was constantly checking doors within the house. His siblings were afraid of him. His memory didn't span more than a couple of days. He was nonverbal, and his siblings were starting to get a little afraid of him, because he was starting to get to that size. 13 years old, he's starting to get to be a big kid. Brought him in, and this was a neurofeedback only. Dozen sessions, and judging by his brain map, really the top priority was getting him calmed and comfortable. Now, in his case, of course, he didn't know why he was in. He didn't know why he was in there. He didn't know why he was sitting in the chair. He didn't know what he was doing. All he knew was that his favorite movie was playing, and that it would stop playing. So, of course, that's the deviation of his brain. His brain is getting it right. His brain is not getting it right. When the video starts to play, it's his favorite show. He gets this little dopamine squirt. He's learned. When the video stops playing, he gets a little irritated. He's got a negative response to that. He's learned. So by that gauge, after 2 weeks, a dozen sessions, he was no longer checking doors. He was starting simple sentences. He was making eye contact. He was able to go out. as well, which is for him was huge because he could start socializing. You know, he could start getting around other kids and doing community project stuff and yeah, getting out there. He was starting to play with his siblings, and his mom got her first "I love you" and her first hug.
Wow.
Which was massive. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Can I ask my second question over, and then I'll turn it over to you? You know, I think of the brain as its exclusive domain is in the head, yeah? And in our previous discussions, you mentioned about the impact of the gut on the brain, and it has it has an impact on some of these cases. I think you maybe have mentioned autism. So I want you to talk about what's the correlation there, what's going on between the gut and the brain.
Well, you know, everybody wishes they knew. What's interesting about the brain is that there are no muscles over the scalp, and muscles are very electrically loud. So what we can do is reference out all the body noise and the heart rate and the breath rate and so on, and listen to the electrical activity with all of the body noise referenced out, and what we get are brain waves. The same now. The gut has as many neurons as either of the hemispheres, and you know you'd think that the brain would be in charge of that, but really, the gut is sending the brain. The gut brain is sending the left and right brain 5 messages for every 2 that it gets back.
Wow.
So really, it's doing a lot more informing than being informed. We get gut reactions. We get there is thinking going on there, and there's congregations of neurons throughout the body, through the nerve plexes. When information comes in from one part of the body, it goes back to the spine, to the nerve plexi. If that plexus deems that information not important, it won't even send it up the spinal cord to the brain. There is thinking and decision making going on throughout the body. The difference is that we can't reference out. The gut is an extremely electrically loud place, and there's nowhere to reference out the body noise. So when you're when you're trying to listen in on quiet little neurons, and there's huge muscle activity going on all around it with the digestion and muscle tone and all of this stuff, you can't hear what they're doing. The difference is that we can hear what they're doing over the scalp.
Okay.
So I think we need to turn to the Eastern methods to get some sense of an idea as to what's going on in the rest of the body, in the nerve plexes, in the gut brain.
So, but you would prescribe certain types of dietary changes as an assistive method to what's going on with your neurofeedback interventions.
Yes. So there are several things that we do, and it really is case dependent. So it's not condition dependent. It's not like in cases of autism we do this particular thing with the gut. Really, we need to break it down a lot. Yeah. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay.
Now there are things that we can do with the gut, and that comes in with something called electromagnetic entrainment, where we put some little electromagnetic coils over the gut. So it's much like brainwave entrainment, except rather than going through sound, we're going through the way the neurons actually communicate with each other, which is electromagnetic. So we might put a little calm, what would be considered a calm neuron sound, electromagnetic sound through the gut, which certainly aids in digestion, aids in IBS. Again, I think we can spend a whole other show on that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about before you talked about how somebody had a great improvement in 12 sessions. And I wonder, did you have an experience of an autistic child completely going out of their condition into, I don't know, I don't want to say normality, okay, but something along those lines?
Well, no, and I don't think it is really realistic to think so. I mean, what we're talking about in autism is rebuilding brain networks, or not rebuilding, building brain networks from scratch that were never there before. Regardless, it's going to be a long-term project. There's going to be a lot of interventions, and there's going to be a lot of learning. You know, something that we learn very, very quickly at 1 or 2 or 3 years old as part of our natural development. We get those skills very quickly during certain developmental stages, and if those developmental stages are missed, you can train them later. It takes longer, and they're not going to train in as well as they would have if if the child had learned them at the particular stage, but it can be done. So
see, I wonder about it, because on one hand, we have the whole discussion that goes on around the vaccinations, toxicity.
Yep.
That could be the cause of the autistic spectrum.
Well, you know, again,
wait a minute. Okay. So let's take this, for example, as the cause. Let's say this is the cause, okay? So here we're looking at what would be the result of brainwaves from something like that. Say the reason is vaccine. Of course, we don't know. There's a lot of speculation about it, and a lot of people claim that their kid was completely normal before they had it vaccinated, and then all hell break loose. They stop talking.
That would be the category of 2/3 of the parents that come to us, actually.
Wow.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit about that and how it relates to what you are discovering when you are doing brain mapping of such a kid. Is it real? And if so, obviously, if there is an element of toxicity, then if you remove the toxicity, if they come to you in an early stage of it, what kind of hope can they look for, or results?
Okay. Well, certainly getting rid of the toxicity is a primary importance, and the gut integrity as well. So what appears to be happening, and of course there's a lot of debate over this and huge legal issues. You know, it should be said that people are winning court cases in the States now for blaming the MMR for the autism, and really there is no reason to give all 3 of those to a child with such a fragile, growing nervous system all at once. It does seem to be a bit of overkill. So it seems to be that in some cases, perhaps when the toxicity is already high, perhaps it is when the child is just maybe a bit more prone to these difficulties anyway. Certainly close family relations, cousins marrying, there's going to be a higher fragility within the child towards toxicity. But it seems that if things reach a critical point, which coincidentally seems to happen quite often a couple of weeks after the MMR vaccine is introduced, then all of those connections that have been made previously melt away. Okay. And they need to be rebuilt. So you're going, and it also plays havoc with the gut flora, which has to do with your neurotransmitter production. So and your overall toxicity. So yes, rebuilding the gut, detoxifying the system, getting the senses back into line, because of course all of those things of learning how to hear and learning how to see and learning how to filter out all of that extra information has to be retrained. You've got to start again from scratch.
Yeah.
An awful lot can be done. There are some real miracle stories out there. You know, every child is different, and the nature of their particular problems are going to be unique as well. So
Yes.
again, a lot can be done. I think if you get it early, you will have a, you know, I hate to say the word normal
Yes. Well, this is
child, but you know,
out of words for that as well.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that the child will always struggle, but they don't have to struggle from an uncomfortable position.
Yeah. Yeah.
And certainly getting the system detoxified and the gut back into line can help them to learn again.
I'm just aware of the time. We have about 2 minutes to go. Obviously, it was just a little bit of a taste of what's possible and what you do. We'll have to have you again to talk
Yes,
about your
certainly.
transformational retreats and all of that, which we
Oh
haven't
yes.
touched on. But that would have to be for another time. We'd like to thank you for joining us for this show. It was absolutely very interesting and enlightening, I would say. I'd like to, before we go, I'd like to say we announced a competition last week of the best tweet ever, the Witty Tweety competition. And we like to extend this because we didn't have you last week. So we like to extend this for another week. And by the end of next week, we will announce the winner. Also, next week we have another show, and the topic of the show is going to be about cancer and about an alternative way of looking at it and at how a person deals with it when they are discovering they have cancer, alternative ways of dealing with it, and so on. So we're having 3 guests, one of which is a herbalist called Fiona Shakila Burns, and another 2 guests from a new website that is called Cancer Beyond Black and White, and that's Anne and her co-creator of this website, Gladys. So I hope people will tune into that. I think it's going to be the most interesting show. Is there anything else that we want to cover before we go?
I think James should just give out his website, although we will hook it up certainly beneath this. But go ahead and just give out your contacts, James.
Yes, thanks. Plug your website.
We can be contacted at www.brainworks with an S, neurotherapy.com. Or as a short method, you can go brainworksnt.com. You'll find our phone number on there and direct email contact. So,
yes, we also have it.
So if you have any questions,
we also have it at the bottom of the description in our video. I put the links there, so people can just click on those links. And I hope that people who are in need of that kind of therapeutic method will find their way to you. We haven't at all spoken about your new method of at-home therapy, where you're sending people the computer and the software, and you're doing the sessions over the internet, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, we're rather on the cutting edge these days. We were lucky enough to get into this 10 years ago when
Yes.
when the field was small. So yes, these days we're getting pretty fancy with it.
Okay, so people can just contact you through the website or even call you if they are from. Do you have a phone for America as well as Europe? Or
We do, yeah. We've got a direct line in New York, so a local access number for any home training in the United States. We do home training throughout Western Europe and Ireland and the UK, of course.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, James, for being with us.
Thank you very much, both of you.
And we are glad that you are okay and everything is okay.
Nice speaking with you both.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay. So this concludes our show today. We are EyesWiseOpen. Our website is EyesWiseOpen.com. I'm Ofer, and this is DJ.
Thank you for being here, and we'll take you out with our signature soundtrack, which is called
I